Meeting will come to order. Today we're here to discuss the opportunities, the risks, and challenges associated with the growth and demand for electric power in the United States. In the half century after World War II, demand for electricity grew steadily in this country along with our economy. But in the decade following the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was in the 1990s, annual electricity demand growth fell by nearly 45%. 45%. And for the past 2 decades, electrical demand or load has been flat across the country. We're here today because that era appears to be coming to an end rapidly. With exponential growth in the domestic technology and manufacturing sectors, utilities and grid experts across the country are telling us that electricity demand is poised for truly remarkable growth. Meeting this demand growth may provide to be one of the greatest challenges that we'll face, and also opportunities of the 21st century for our citizens, our economy, and the defense and security of our country. I want to thank our witnesses for being here to share their perspective on this historic load growth and what is at stake if we do not meet it. The load growth is being driven by 3 main factors as we evaluate it. First, it is the reshoring of industry and advanced manufacturing spurred by the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, and the IRA. Construction spending on manufacturing has more than doubled since we signed these bills, and I think you see this behind you, signed these bills into law as shown in the chart behind me. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. People don't realize how much is coming into the U.S. and how rapidly in the demand. That's all, that tells you the spread of energy that we need and what we don't have maybe. So you look at Europe, EU has been flat as a pancake. Most of all the world's been flat as a pancake, and here we are. We are seeing new factories to build advanced energy and semiconductor technology spring up practically every week. Second, it is a revolution in advanced computing applications, especially artificial intelligence and the rapid growth in data centers to provide the processing power needed for those technologies. And I understand that they just have an unquenchable thirst for power as far as the data centers. And third, it is the push to electrify technologies across the multiple sectors, like the administration's push to flood the market with EVs, which I think they're way over their skis on. And I've been cautioning and warning them from day one. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC as we know it, projects in its 2023 long-term reliability assessment that there will be 90 gigawatts of demand growth by 2030. Put that in perspective. That's over 10% of this peak of the U.S. electrical demand, which is about 750 gigawatts. But even that number is likely conservative. NERC relies on data submitted in the previous year from industry, and the forecasts just keep growing unbelievably faster than what they can keep up with it. Last month, this is unbelievable, last month, the Texas grid operator revised its 2030 load forecast from last year to add 40 gigawatts of new expected load growth. One state. That's like adding the demand of the entire state of California to the Texas grid 6 years from now. That should be a wake-up call. I hope it is. We need to be prepared to meet this demand. Let me be clear. The load growth is an opportunity of generation, and it's ours to lose. The reason we have the growth is that industries which will define the 21st century, chips, AI, advanced manufacturing, are tripping over one another to build in America. They're coming from all over the world. But there is no guarantee of success, to put it plainly. We can't be open for business if we can't keep the lights on. If America can't build the energy infrastructure needed to support these industries with reliable and affordable power, we'll be forfeiting the opportunity to be on the forefront of technologies of the future and cede control to China and other nations that we cannot necessarily trust. And right now, between the administration's policies and our inability to act in Congress, it seems like we may be in the real danger of doing just that. We've heard from both FERC and NERC that our grid's reliability and affordability are at risk because we are retiring base load, dispatchable generation faster than we can replace it. They came in and spoke with me and told me that basically we're taking off dispatchable 24/7, whether it be coal, nukes, whatever it may be that we can depend on, and now even natural gas because of an environmental movement, and trying to replace it with intermittent power, and they're very, very concerned across the board. NERC's summer assessment came out last week. This is brand new numbers, and shows half the country at elevated risk of blackouts this summer, as shown in this chart. If you live or represent one of these areas, tell them to watch out. They're going to be in trouble. Potential is great that they may be having rolling brownouts and even blackouts. And that should be concerning to everybody in this administration and every senator and congressperson who represents those areas. Last July, NERC even added energy policy as a brand new category of major risk facing our grid. When NERC, basically nonpartisan, says the policies that you're putting out in Washington, and only Washington can fix it, is basically putting us at risk, you should take heed. It's ridiculous that government action is creating new categories of grid risk instead of preventing the risk. As if to prove NERC's point, EPA recently finalized 4 new power plant rules that, as far as I can tell, aim to kill coal completely and stop natural gas from replacing it. It's a double whammy. I don't know what they're thinking of. Even though these dispatchable resources are essential for reliability. And I've said this to them, the transition is going to happen, but you can't take something off before you have something equally as good, if not better, to replace it with. You might not like coal, but coal's built this country what it is today. We're doing it better and cleaner than any place else in the world. And the transition's there. No one's fighting the transition. Just give us other jobs that we can do, take care of our family, make a living. That's fine. The bottom line is we don't have that technology yet. We're not there. But they're just damned to do it because of the political reasons. And that's what we're trying to make sure they understand that it's not going to work. These dispatchable resources are essential for the reliability, as I've said. In this administration, we're serious about onshoring critical industry, the ones driving the load growth. They wouldn't be in a race to take power offline. They'd be racing to bring new generation on. But instead, it's getting harder and harder to permit and build new energy infrastructure and connect new generation to the grid. It just is. We now have 2.6 million megawatt hours of generation waiting an average of 5 years to connect. Think about that. So 2.6 million megawatt hours waiting to go and nowhere to go with it. For example, in West Virginia, in my little state, we have one plant, over 1,800 megawatts, state-of-the-art combined cycle gas plant with carbon capture, the cleanest it can possibly be, the cleanest. But the company's telling me they have to wait half a decade before they even get the green light to even start the permitting. It's unbelievable. And to be clear, these are not just problems for fossil plants. It's as bad or even worse for wind. I can't believe this chart. This is where wind demand, this is what's happening in wind, how far it's gone down. They can't connect. There's nowhere to connect. Solar is doing much better because solar can get into the grid system faster. It's in areas where the grid's already there. Wind is coming in areas, whether it be offshore or whether it be somewhere out to where there's no grid system whatsoever. And they cannot get there because they can't get permitting. And if the majority leader, Senator Schumer, believes that what was done cured all the problems, I got news, it didn't do it. American Clean Power just published their 2024, as you can see. We're on pace to install less wind in 2024 than we did during the worst year of the Great Recession, as shown in the chart. There was a recession coming out of it here. Now we're down to there. We have to make it easier to build generation, pipelines, transmission lines to meet the moment, and that's why the permitting is needed so desperately. FERC finalized 2 rules last week, which in time may help build new transmission, but let me be clear. These rules are using the tools FERC currently has and are not a replacement for congressional action. These rules help with one aspect of one part of a bigger set of the grid permitting problems. I know all of you all have looked into this, but as my friend Senator Hickenlooper said, they're a Band-Aid on Congress's inaction, which you're totally right, Senator. For example, the new rules took action on transmission lines within regions. Transmission lines already within the regions, not for the inter-regional lines that are truly have the most reliability and affordability benefits to offer. It didn't affect them at all. And only if the rules prove durable in courts and under future administrations. They're all going to be challenged. I want to quote FERC Commissioner Clements 2 days after the rules came out, and she said, and she's retiring in June, considerable work remains to be done, both at the Commission and in Congress, if we are to realize the modern electricity grid on which the continued vitality of the United States economy and security increasingly depends For some of these next steps, particularly interregional planning and permitting reform, congressional action could be critical in providing direction and momentum to the Commission. And just so we're clear that permitting and transmission legislation is not partisan priority, let me also quote Mario Loyola, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation who served in the White House during the Trump administration. He said after FERC issued its new rules, transmission expansion has only become more difficult. These are problems only Congress can solve. I have to say I couldn't agree more. There are critical permitting problems for all types of energy infrastructure that only Congress can fix, and I remain committed to addressing that. Myself and Senator Brasso's team have been working diligently for quite a while. We finally have language. We're going to start sharing this language with everyone that people can see where we are, and hopefully that maybe we can all get our act together here. In fact, each of the industry witnesses before us today submitted technology that speaks in stark terms to the permitting challenges facing new sources of electricity supply and demand. I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses and topic shortly. With this, I'm going to turn to Ranking Member Brasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding today's important hearing. The Americans' demand for electricity is expected to grow rapidly through 2030. In fact, we may be entering a period of sustained demand growth unlike anything we have seen since the 2 decades following World War II. As you said, Mr. Chairman, we cannot be open for business if we cannot keep the lights on. The biggest source of new electricity demand is expected to come from data centers. Data centers enable cloud computing, Bitcoin mining, and artificial intelligence. How we meet this growing demand for electricity will have serious economic and security consequences for our nation. Stakes couldn't be higher. In fact, many believe that the race for artificial intelligence with communist China will be more consequential than the space race with the former Soviet Union. And the AI race has already begun. Data centers running artificial intelligence consume massive amounts of electricity. Some estimates suggest that electricity demand for these data centers will double between now and 2030. Whoever secures affordable and reliable electric power, China or America, will have a big head start in the race for artificial intelligence. And right now, America is not positioned well. Our grid is already strained. For years, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, has raised alarm about grid reliability. It's warned that the premature retirement of coal and natural gas-fired power plants has increased the risk for blackouts and brownouts in much of the country. Yet the retirements continue, and President Biden is making the situation worse. Last month, the Environmental Protection Agency issued new rules that will force the premature closure of even more coal and natural gas-fired power plants. These plants play a major role in ensuring electric reliability. They also help make electricity more affordable. President Biden doesn't seem to care at all. He wants the cost of complying with EPA rules to be high. He wants to force operators to shut down these plants before the end of their useful life. It is a disgrace. We cannot regulate our way to more electric generation. When it comes to data centers, the quality of the generation source is as important as the quantity of electricity generated. Now, I acknowledge wind and solar can help, yet they are weather dependent. Batteries, too, can help, yet batteries are expensive and can't provide power for extended periods. They also require vast amounts of minerals from China, from the Congo, from Indonesia, and other countries with horrible human rights and environmental records. We need a reliable, steady, and balanced supply of electricity. Nuclear, coal, natural gas, and hydropower can provide that. With demand poised to surge, it only makes sense to keep our existing power plants operating while also building new generating capacity. Our goal should be addition, not subtraction. Mr. Chairman, the 20th century was the American century. Which country will lead the 21st century is still up for grabs. Much depends on how America capitalizes on the potential of artificial intelligence. The President's opposition to coal, to natural gas, and to even hydropower, the fuels that generate 65% of our electricity, is a white flag. It is a surrender, an act of surrender to China. Mr. Chairman, this chart shows that China has added 262 gigawatts of coal-fired electric generation since the Paris Climate Agreement in 2025. The red lines, how much China has added from coal-fired power plants to electric generation. Meanwhile, the United States has shut down over 100 gigawatts of coal-fired electric generation. What does this mean? It means that when China's AI developers need electric power, the Chinese Communist Party is going to make absolutely sure that they will get it. And they will get it from coal. When America's AI developers need power, will it be enough? Will it be reliable? Will it be affordable? Right now, under Joe Biden and the Democrats, the answer is no. The race for artificial intelligence is one America cannot afford to lose. And we cannot win this or any other race with China if we are unwilling to use the very energy sources that China is going to exploit to the fullest. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to turn to our panel of witnesses. I'm going to introduce you all, and then I'm going to go to Senator Risch, if I may. Mr. Ben Fowke, he is interim CEO and president of the American Electric Power Company, one of our home state utilities in West Virginia. Ben's good having you here. To Karen Obanion, I'm sorry, I got it back. That's close, wasn't it? President and CEO of the Electricity Consumers Resource Council. We have Mr. Scott Gatzemeier, Corporate Vice President of Front-End U.S. Expansion at Micron Technologies. And we have Mr. Mark Mills back again, Executive Director of the National Center for Energy Analytics. At this time, I'm going to turn to my friend, Senator Risch.
Well, thank you, Chairman Manchin. I appreciate that, and to the ranking member, Barrasso, both of you, for holding what's really an important hearing today, and covers a lot of ground and underscores some real shortcomings that we have, but that we can address. It's my privilege today to introduce to you a distinguished Idahoan, Scott Gatzemeier, who's Vice President of U.S. Expansion for Micron Technology. Micron Technology was founded in Boise, Idaho, and had a very humble beginning, to say the least, and it's grown today to be one of the top 4 semiconductor companies in the world. Idaho ingenuity drove this growth and continues to drive the company's innovation in advanced memory and storage technologies. Micron's advancements have given the United States a competitive edge in data storage, security, and supercomputing. However, all is not well in the semiconductor industry. For those of us that serve on Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committee and who work in the national security lane, over recent years have heard over and over and over again the shortcomings of the semiconductor industry. And it was driven by the semiconductor industry following the siren of cheap wages and moving really production offshore. And this has caused us some real difficulties, and it is very much a national security industry or a national security problem. With semiconductors, I think everybody is aware, and no one more than the defense industry and the defense contractors, how important microchips are, semiconductors are, in the construction of certain products. They're in everything now. They're in refrigerators, TVs, and in automobiles, but very importantly, they're in just about everything that we manufacture having to do with defense. Thus, what those of us who saw this came up with the CHIPS Act, a $52 billion addition to our budget to stimulate bringing this industry back to the United States. This was not driven by a desire to subsidize the semiconductor industry. It was designed to meet what was a great challenge in semiconductor production, and to bring it back here to the United States and close this gap on national security. It appears to me it's working. We thought it would. No one ever knows till you actually try it. But right now, this is happening. And Micron is leading the charge in onshoring chip production again. The company recently broke ground on a new fab in Boise, Idaho, and has plans to build 4 additional fabs nationwide. Mr. Gatzemeier, who brings more than 25 years of experience across fab engineering, operations, and technology development is Micron's leading expert on domestic expansion. His experience and expertise position him to offer a unique perspective on how Congress and industry must rise to the challenge of returning the American-born semiconductor industry to the United States. A key component of meeting that challenge is sufficient and dependable energy, and it's no accident that companies like Micron continue to invest in Idaho. Our state's all-of-the-above energy policies and support for clean, reliable, affordable, always-on hydropower make it a prime location. And this issue of the national security and semiconductors fits very well with the subject of what we're talking about today, because it does demand a tremendous amount of energy. And Mr. Chairman, I think you did a really good job of underscoring what the experts are telling us we're going to need for energy in the future. So, Scott, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to hearing your testimony on this important issue.
Well, Senator Rich, thank you. I know you have a very, very important Foreign Relations Committee that you have to be involved with coming up right now, so I'm sure Scott will get you up to date as quickly as possible after you have to go.
Thank you.
With that, let's start with our testimonies, and Mr. Fowke, you're first.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barracio, and committee members, thank you for the invitation to testify at today's hearing. My name is Ben Fowke, and I serve as interim CEO and president of American Electric Power Company. AEP is one of the largest electric utilities in the United States, serving customers across an 11-state footprint. We have a diverse electric generation fleet, and we own and operate the largest transmission system in the United States. This is a significant moment for our country, our industry, and our company. We at AEP are excited about the opportunities and challenges ahead of us as we meet the growing demand for electricity in our regions. Demand for electricity was almost flat for 2 decades. We are now beginning to see this trend reverse, driven by large customers such as industrial manufacturers, data processors, and others who require significant amounts of power. The efforts of Congress to support the development of these businesses have been remarkably successful, and companies are now building and growing here in America because, in part, we have abundant and diverse energy resources and reliable and affordable power. However, in some areas of the country, the demand for electricity is growing faster than the available capacity. Just a few years ago, a large-scale industrial manufacturing facility might require 100 megawatts, or about enough to power 100,000 homes. A facility that size would typically be one of a kind in a region, would be a major source of economic activity for that area. Now it is common for a single data center to require 3 up to 15 times this amount of power for a single site. As technology evolves, power demand from data processing is expected to double nationwide in 3 years. One small example of this demand surge, OpenAI's ChatGPT requires 2.9 watt-hours for a request. Now, that's nearly 10 times more power than a typical Google search. AEP currently has requests from large customers that would more than double the existing peak demand we serve on our system today. It took over 100 years of planning and building to create our current system, and a step change in infrastructure investment on an accelerated time frame will be required to serve even a fraction of this future demand in a reliable manner. As demand is rapidly increasing, our nation's electricity system is transforming to accommodate new forms of energy. The pace of this transformation must not overtake the reliability needs of our system. Independent assessments by NERC find the risk of electric power supply disruptions are steadily increasing. Our society depends on a reliable power system. As we embark on this era of economic growth and technological transformation, customers need an energy system that is available to deliver reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive power where and when they need it. Continued development of the electric system must be a central priority of U.S. energy and economic policy, and we need to think bigger and more comprehensively to address the many opportunities and challenges in front of us. For your part, we ask that Congress work with regulators to ensure electric system resource adequacy and prevent premature retirements of dispatchable power plants. This includes considering the impact of recent EPA regulations, which could hasten the pace of plant retirements and diminish reliability. Collaborating with FERC and other federal state constituents to evaluate the establishment of a central planning authority focused on reliability, and directing FERC to ensure that viable, reliability safety valve mechanisms are in place to prevent premature plant retirements. Congress should also expedite the development of new 24/7 dispatchable and clean energy resources to meet the growing consumer demand. This could be done through encouraging FERC to allow for fast tracking of generation resources in the interconnection queues that have been selected by utilities to meet their obligation to serve customers, encouraging the development of advanced technologies such as next-generation nuclear, passing a siting and permitting package that accelerates the development of critical infrastructure, and maintaining the Inflation Reduction Act and the technology-neutral and nuclear tax credits which serve to reduce costs for customers. Finally, Congress should encourage FERC's recent efforts to support the efficient development of necessary regional and interregional electric transmission facilities to ensure reliability and accommodate economic growth and development. The electric power industry will play a crucial role in helping the U.S. remain a global leader in advanced manufacturing and technology innovation. With the help of Congress and our federal and state regulators and agencies, we can serve this emerging demand and secure America's role as a leader for generations to come. To do so, we will need to work together to quickly build new sources of electric generation and high-voltage power lines to deliver electricity where it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Honoran, we have you next, if you will.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Karen Obanion. I am the President and CEO of the Electricity Consumers Resource Council, or ELCON. ELCON is the trade association for large industrial consumers of electricity. Our mission is to ensure that we have reliable and affordable power, and so we support the development and adoption of rational and coordinated policy to ensure that electric reliability at low cost. The purpose of my testimony today is to represent the industrial sector as one of the drivers of the electricity demand that we're speaking of today. So after decades of decline in manufacturing, domestic manufacturing is seeing a resurgence in the U.S. According to a recent report from the Deloitte Research Center for Energy and Industrials, the number of manufacturing facilities in the U.S. grew by over 11% between the first quarter of 2019 and the second quarter of 2023. Construction spending on manufacturing has nearly tripled since June 2020 and was up 37% year over year in January 2024 when construction spending reached a high of $225 billion. As a result, the industrial sector is projected to add 36 gigawatts of additional power by 2030. Bringing manufacturing back to U.S. shores has many implications and benefits, as we've talked about. This is bringing investment into communities that have been neglected in the past, bringing thousands of jobs, whether that be through construction, the permanent jobs to run the operations in manufacturing, and the secondary jobs to support those workers, including retail and food and housing. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, the industrial sector contributed at a yearly rate of $2.9 trillion to the U.S. economy in the third quarter of 2023, and it projects that we will need approximately 3.8 million manufacturing workers in the next decade. We've already heard about the national security implications. We can no longer rely on hostile foreign nations to supply our critical infrastructure, our critical minerals, and our computing power. And we saw the devastating impacts during COVID of supply chain interruptions. It behooves us to create more, manufacture more here on our shores. So at this point, we must right-size our grid, and we must meet this demand by reducing some of the regulatory barriers that we are seeing. We all know the risks. We've heard them today, from varying energy supply to extreme weather, like we saw in Houston last week. So we cannot take any options off the table right now. We need all of the above resources, and we need the infrastructure to support those resources. We need an agile and flexible grid that can manage variable supply as well as variable demands. Demand is going to change their profiles. So we really implore this committee and the Congress to pass significant permitting reform for transmission infrastructure and other energy infrastructure. We've seen that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has taken some measures to address interconnection backlogs and transmission, but we still have a lot more work to do. I really ask everyone to come to the table and work on solutions. Take nothing off the table now. And finally, even though we all appreciate and wish to be good stewards of the environment, the EPA rules that recently came out further complicates a tenuous situation on our grid. And so we cannot be further impeding our reliable and safe and affordable electricity. Electricity underpins our national economy, our national security, and the prosperity and ingenuity here in the United States. Senators, again, I thank you so much for your invitation. I will conclude my remarks and look forward to your questions.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, Senator Risch, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and represent Micron regarding the importance of affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. I serve as the Corporate Vice President for Micron's expansion in the United States. Micron was founded more than 45 years ago in Boise, Idaho, in the basement of a dentist's office. Today, Micron is a world leader in design, development, and manufacturing of memory and storage technology. We have an expansive IP portfolio of more than 55,000 patents. We operate in 17 countries, and we have over 40,000 team members worldwide. Micron plans to invest $125 billion with the support of the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act to build fabs in Onondaga County, New York, and Boise, Idaho that will transform these regions and create over 75,000 jobs. We are also seeking CHIPS funding for our existing fab in Manassas, Virginia, that would be excited to host you or your staff on a tour. Washington has been focused on the vital role that semiconductors play in American economic and national security. Micron is the only manufacturer of memory. Our memory and storage products are essential to all computing and storage capabilities in phones, data centers, computers, and numerous other devices. Without memory, none of those devices would be able to operate and provide the remarkable capabilities that shape our modern world. Micron has an expansive memory product portfolio from the DRAM chips that will be made in Idaho and New York to the NAND and NOR in Virginia to Micron's latest product, high bandwidth memory, HBM3E. Our high bandwidth memory powers today's generative AI models by enabling them to break through data bottlenecks. Micron's HBM is the fastest, highest capacity, and 30% more energy efficient than other products available across the industry. As Micron manufacturers, we have made significant efforts to reduce our consumption of energy, which is detailed in my written report. However, between the expansions of U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, new data centers, and other manufacturing in the U.S. has been highlighted, electric demand will grow faster over the coming years than it has in decades. For all those planned investments in the U.S. manufacturing and data centers to actually work, the U.S. needs to modernize its grid and expand electricity generation capacity. When it comes to energy permitting, I'm an Idahoan, and I'll speak to the challenges that we face. The western U.S. produces an abundance of sustainable energy, including hydropower in the Northwest, wind in Wyoming, solar in the desert Southwest, but capacity is constrained on the transmission lines that move energy from the places it's generated to the homes, farms, and businesses that need it. There is no transition to sustainable energy without transmission. To power our fab in Boise, we plan to import 400 megawatts of affordable, reliable power from the Pacific Northwest in the summer when a surplus of energy is available there. In the winter, when the Pacific Northwest energy demand peaks, utilities there will import energy across the planned Boardman to Hemingway, or B2H, transmission line from Oregon to Boise. B2H began in late 2006. Idaho Power has a record of decision but does not have a notice to proceed from the federal government. The cost to build B2H is between $1.5 and $1.7 billion. On top of that, permitting costs have already exceeded $220 million. Construction is finally slated to begin later this year with completion in 2027, over 20 years after this project began. A federal permitting process that adds 2 decades to the project timeline and adds hundreds of millions of dollars in the cost in permitting is not a permitting process that will enable a U.S. manufacturing renaissance or AI leadership. Above all, Micron supports efforts which will ensure affordable and reliable electricity, which could include a balanced approach to permitting reform that utilizes all avenues to support the growth of domestic manufacturing, improves reliability of the grid, maintains low energy costs, and addresses the need for sustainable energy sources. I'll leave you with this. Micron's main product is memory chips. It's an intensely competitive and dynamic business. Micron succeeds because we provide an edge, often in power requirements or better performance metrics, but we've been growing and planning to grow and invest to meet our customers in the digital economy. It's imperative that Congress also plan for the energy demands of the data-driven economy of today and tomorrow so that the United States can remain competitive and a destination for manufacturers like Micron. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Mr. Mills.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Manchin and Ranking Member Barrasso, for the opportunity to testify. And Senators, if I may, as a personal observation and a longtime observer of this great committee and occasional witness, just note that it's music to my ears, I'll have to say, to hear such significant bipartisan convergence on such a critical issue. It's some personal interest because I began my career as a young physicist in a semiconductor fabs in New Jersey and Ohio. And we are, as you said, Senator, at a rare pivot in history. We're witnessing the emergence of a significant and ostensibly unanticipated new vector for electricity demand. And as you know, I'm referring specifically to the emergence of useful artificial intelligence, AI, especially when it's combined with the next phase of expansion for the cloud computing infrastructure that was pioneered in the United States and has expanded to the world. While there is debate, of course, and outright guesswork about where the future specific uses for AI will come from, both civilian and military, no one doubts that the AI boom is here. Utility planners and energy pundits have rediscovered a basic truth. The arrival of new ways to boost the economy illustrates a longstanding correlation, a kind of iron law that links growth with rising energy use and especially electricity use. We have a good idea why we're now seeing such surprising leaps in near-term forecasts for electricity demand. Put in monetary terms, not the physics terms that I grew up with, but in monetary terms, every $1 billion spent on data centers leads to over $60 million a year in electricity purchases. And last year, before the AI acceleration kicked into high gear, capital spending on U.S. data centers was running at over $100 billion a year. Now the addition of AI-enabled hardware is accelerating both the rate at which data centers are being ordered and the energy use per data center. So $1 billion spent on a new AI-infused data center will likely drive something like $200 million a year in energy purchases. Now, for context, the $1 billion spent on new EVs, for example, or $1 billion worth of new chip factories generates only about $20 million a year in annual electricity demand. That AI has a voracious energy appetite is not news in the technical community. There's been myriad studies pointing out that the so-called training phase, that is the equivalent of building, not flying an aircraft, can use as much electricity as driving a Tesla, anywhere from 300,000 to 4 million miles. And then the use phase, flying the AI, so to speak, can consume 10 times more electricity. And there are, for all practical purposes, nearly unlimited numbers of potential applications for both training and using AI. Of course, AI will become more energy efficient. The latest AI chips are already 100-fold more energy efficient over the last half dozen years, and they will get another 100-fold more efficient before the year 2030. But efficiency won't solve the so-called problem of rising electricity demands. It will do the opposite, just as it did in the rise of the first cloud era. Improving energy efficiency lowers costs, which is what makes the proliferation of the benefits of the product or service possible, especially in digital domains. Operating at the computing efficiency of a 1980 computer is a single smartphone today. Just one of them would use as much electricity as a skyscraper. A single data center would use the entire grid. It's because of electricity gains that the world has billions of smartphones and thousands of data centers. Consequently, today's global cloud infrastructure already rivals the energy used by global aviation, and that's before AI. We can count on the pattern repeating with AI. Electricity demand coming from the expansion of the cloud will continue to overshadow the combined impact of new EVs and new chip factories. But whether the AI expansion is in fact fully realized and chip factories, and the expansion of chip factories and EVs as well in America, that will be determined, as other witnesses and senators have said, on whether we have adequate electricity, whether it's affordable, and whether it's available when it's needed. And given the scales of electricity demand from the cloud and AI particularly, when added to the demands from reshoring manufacturing and promoting EVs, the nation's electricity producers now need full access to all options. Electric power planning now needs to focus on additions to, not transitions away from, existing electricity production. The U.S. is the world's cloud leader today. We pioneered it. We pioneered AI, much as the U.S. was a dominant aluminum producer just 25 years ago. Producing, again, in monetary terms, $1 billion of aluminum requires purchasing some $400 million of electricity, which today happens mainly on low-cost coal-fired grids in China, which has become the world's dominant supplier of aluminum, while the U.S. now has single-digit percentage share of global aluminum supply. Aluminum and silicon are different materials in different industries, but the energy implications of the two domains, I suggest, has a relevant lesson for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll start with our questions, and I'll begin. I've got so many questions, I don't know where to start, to be honest with you. But first of all, I'll ask you all. You heard about what FERC, the rules that FERC came out with. And some people are over anxious thinking it took care of everything. Do any of you believe that what FERC rule cleared or took care of our permitting problems that we have getting things built, especially transmission or getting pipelines built or any of the things we need? Anybody believe that it cured it? Nobody?
No.
Okay. And you know, we all understand it stays within the region. So all it did is allowed, if you have a regional transmission, it stays where you can do some repair, add in there, but doesn't take care of interconnecting, right? Okay. So we're all on the same page there. We all agree with the charts that we had here. Let me just show you on this chart here. This chart shows where if you live in these areas or you represent any of these areas coming this summer is where they're predicting you're going to have rolling brownouts or blackouts because the demand will be so great. It doesn't account for the winter. Now, it'll change around in winter when the load is different in winter. We understand that. I would ask you, Mr. Gatzemeier, on yours, coming from the technology end of it, where you're all looking to put your new databases and things of that sort. Do you look at this and finding out where you might have more reliable power, where you might go and recommend putting a plant or a center in an area where they're going to be reliable and not basically intermittent?
Yeah, power reliability is incredibly important to our industry. A minor...
Does that factor into basically making decisions on where you're located?
Yes, it did. In fact, when you look at New York, one of the reasons why I made the decision to go there is there's a nuclear power plant 40 miles directly north of our facility with a direct line connection to a 345 kV substation across the street from that site. And in looking at it, it was one of the most reliable substations on the grid when we were looking at where to select our site. So reliability of the system is incredibly important to semiconductor fabs because a small millisecond blip in our power would take down our factory for up to a week by interrupting processing. So reliability is incredibly important to semiconductor fab manufacturing.
I'm going to pull up the chart that I used before on wind. And truly all of our environmental friends and everything are big on the wind, thinking it's going to come. I know our majority leader is big on wind. Wind has hit a slump and is going down because it takes so long to build the transmission lines. Solar, it's easy to bring solar on. Solar is record high. Wind has dipped clear down to here. Do you all agree or disagree with this analogy of what happened to wind because we can't get transmission built? What I'm trying to make a point is that we all have to have permitting reform. And we have worked on this committee in a bipartisan effort, Mr. Mills, you point out. We all understand. We just can't get the administration to understand the need of how desperate that we're needed for this. Have you all had any contact with the White House, John Podesta's office, the climate department there, about the need to get permitting done, to get the lines to be able to deliver the, have you had any input at all? Have they reached out to you at all? No, none of you. Have you tried to reach out to them and tell them how desperate we are of trying to get transmission and get things built? I would encourage you to do so if you haven't. Please do so and reach out to them. The other thing is, on China, do you believe that China has a competitive edge with the amount of power they have dispatchable to them? Mr. Mills, you want to comment on that?
Well, Senator, they have a profound competitive edge in low-cost, high-reliability electric power, as you well know, and a profound competitive edge on exporting the critical minerals and materials that we use to build our unreliable power.
If we don't have the capacity, and Mr. Gatzemeier, back to the production end of it, AI coming on so strong, if we're not able to keep pace and be the leader of the world, are we in jeopardy because of the power, lack of power that we have in a timely fashion?
I think you said it. You can't run a business if you can't keep the lights on. We need additional generation, and so we encourage investigation in all sources of new generation, like new hydro, new nuclear, small modular reactors, geothermal, battery technology for wind and solar to make them more reliable, because our fabs run 24/7. So encourage looking at all sources of generation and requiring new generation to be created before you retire existing generation.
Mr. Fowke, if I could ask you, since I'm a customer of yours.
Thank you.
Anyway, are you concerned about the amount of EPA regulations coming out in power plants, that you're going to have to be closing more reliable power than what you intend to do?
Yeah, very much so. The EPA is a big fan of CCS, and they think that's the best available technology. As you know, we had a pilot program to explore the carbon capture, and we've got some experience with it, and it has its challenges in front of us, and it's not a proven technology today, and nor is the infrastructure to move the carbon to sequester it available. So while it might be a viable technology, a proven technology in the future, it's not today, and it's unrealistic to expect that it will be available by 2030.
Do you have any coal-fired plants that are being retired earlier than what their time?
We will have to have that conversation with our commissions. They weren't scheduled to be retired in 2032, and these rules, if you don't comply with these rules, you need to shut the plants down, and that would be a premature shutdown.
And also, for the record, on the premature shutdown, who continues to pay? Because your rate was based on the life of the plant, correct?
Correct.
So it's based into the rate that West Virginians and anybody in your system, we're going to be paying for shutting down earlier and bringing on other power too. So it's a double whammy for the most hard-pressed, challenged people, basically. It doesn't make any sense at all. No sense whatsoever, sir. I hope you speak up loud and clear, and you put statements out what's going to happen and who's going to pay the freight.
We plan to do just that, Senator.
Thank you, sir. Senator.
Well, thank you. Just to follow up, Mr. Fowke. So in 2021, you testified before a different committee in the Senate that, quote, renewable energy can only take us so far. You went on to say, at higher levels of intermittent renewables, the cost of the energy system begins to skyrocket and the reliability degrades. Still true today?
Yeah, I made that testimony when I was CEO of Xcel Energy, but that statement still holds true because it reflects the physics of the grid. I am a big proponent of renewable energy. I think it's part of the solution, and it's part of how we address climate change and the risk of it. But the reality is, the more renewable generation you put on the grid, at some point that grid reaches saturation point, and then the value of that renewable energy diminishes, and the integration cost increases. And it's the reality that the big grid that we're all part of needs 24/7 spinning mass dispatchable generation. And that's just a fact, and we have to accept that.
So it's dangerous to force all these natural gas and coal-fired plants offline at this point. So, Mr. Mills, let me go to you. What would be the consequences if the federal and state regulators effectively prohibit the use of natural gas and coal to meet the growing demand for electricity?
Well, in simplest terms, a stifling of economic growth and opportunity and a profound disadvantage geopolitically. You can only consume the energy you produce. And since we all witnesses and all of the members of the committee understand now that we have soaring demand for economically driven need for electricity, we won't get that growth without the power.
So Some argue that electric batteries will also play a big role in meeting the growing demand for electricity. They argue that rapid deployment developments in the battery technology are going to enable us to store energy for longer periods of time, lower costs. What's your assessment of the state of battery technology? And what are the implications for the affordability of electric service if we rely significantly on these batteries?
Well, I'll make a point, a technical point, a physics point. Batteries don't produce energy. They store it. They're extraordinarily expensive ways to store energy. On an engineering physics basis, roughly 100 times more expensive than the traditional ways to store energy, tanks, caverns, piles of coal. They will play, and are playing, a very significant role in short-term stabilization. For long-term energy storage, the United States would have to deploy tens of trillions of dollars of batteries at scales that the world cannot now manufacture nor produce the minerals for.
So let me follow. So Jigar Shah, who's the head of the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office, he recently argued that the projected growth in demand for electricity that we've all talked about and been reported broadly in the press, he said that's significantly overstated. He claims many large energy users can control when they need electricity. He said they might agree to stop using power during times of peak demand. He also said that individuals will stop using electricity during times of high demand in response to high prices. Right. In your view, will this be enough to address the growing demand for electricity? And if not, why not?
Well, first, another physics point. Demand-side management doesn't produce energy. It's avoiding the use of energy. Economic growth requires more energy. Also, utilities have been very, very good at managing demand for about a century. This is not a new discovery in the utility industry. I would say the principal discovery is that our society is more electrified, and that there are fewer and fewer sources of, quote, low-hanging fruit, where we would turn to, and I'll pick on Micron because they're a spectacular company, where you would turn to them when they're running their factory, who will tell us, as the fabs I worked in, if you take power away for milliseconds, you cause astonishing economic destruction. I have had that happen to me when I ran a fab as a young man. So you don't get to ask them, would you please turn it off right now? The wind isn't blowing. And our batteries have run out, because when you have a 4-hour battery at 4 hours and 1 second, you're black. You don't have a pile of coal nearby. You don't have more electricity. If there's a wind lull, it's cloud covered. It is not a solution, but it is a tool in managing cycles. Society is cyclical. Humans are cyclical. So peak demands can be shaved, but they don't produce energy.
Well, since you turned to Micron, let me turn to Micron. I understand that both the availability of electric service and the quality of the electric service that you get are incredibly important to Micron. What's the impact of temporary voltage dips that we just talked about on facilities like yours?
Yeah, I also unfortunately have had the opportunity to recover a fab from a minor power blip, milliseconds. Tens of millions of dollars of product loss in that fab recovery. This would be on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars product loss on these other, larger facilities that we will be building. So absolutely a large economic impact. And while we are putting in all sorts of energy savings types of opportunities, variable speed drives, heat capture recovery, we're putting all that in to try to lower our demand, the ability to fluctuate. We're what we call a base load. We run 24/7, 365, all the time at peak out, and you cannot just shut it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member. I'm one of those that believes we still need permitting reform. Ms. Honoran, let me start with you, and I want to express my appreciation for ELCON's endorsement and support of one of my bills. It's the Expediting Generator Interconnection Procedures Act, GIPA for short. I was pleased to see your testimony call on Congress to consider this legislation as soon as possible, really in order to ease what we are talking about, this interconnection backlogs, enhance grid reliability, and lower energy costs. As we have all been talking about and are aware, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab recently determined there were over 2,600 gigawatts of generation and storage pending in U.S. interconnected queues at the end of 2023. Ms. Honoran, can you talk a little bit about why expanding on some of the ways that this legislation works to alleviate the bottlenecks, and it will have a positive impact on energy development and grid resiliency?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And yes, Elcon was a supporter of that proposed bill. We are at a point where we need, again, as my testimony stated, all of the above resources. We have a lot of resources that are hung up in the interconnection queue that are ready to put steel in the ground and start producing power. And unfortunately, due to regulatory constructs at the markets, these are being held up through red tape and restudies. And so we really need to find a way to standardize and perhaps automate some of these study processes so that we can do it quickly and quicker and get these resources on the grid. FERC has done some work with their Order 2023, but we still need to go further, and it's just the first step. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I have you, because you mentioned this, and this is always a concern of mine, because I think as we build out our portfolio around energy, including clean energy, we need to ensure we have a workforce. And you talked a little bit about it. So when considering the severity of literally growing and moving forward in clean energy and all of these projects, what do we need to be thinking about for that workforce? Is it there? Or should we be putting more investments, and what type of investments in the workforce?
Yes, absolutely. Coming from the utility side before I joined the consumer side, that was something we heard from the utilities quite a bit, that the workers to come, even managing our electric system, the same for manufacturing. Trade schools, things like that have, declined. There was a more prominent focus on, say, liberal arts education. We moved away from sort of the trade education that we need. We need to encourage more workers to look at some of these new and emerging jobs. We need to make sure that they're well paid. We need to make sure that they can exist in this society and can prosper. And so we really need to be investing in our future workforce, and we need to start doing that now.
Thank you. Mr. Fowke, are you familiar with advanced reconductoring? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's an opportunity, as we're talking about building out the grid and transmission, the technology is also going to help us with that capacity. Isn't that correct? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a grid-enhancing technology. We actually have just used it a couple years ago down in South Texas, where we used the advanced conductor technology to, in a 330-mile transmission line of 345 kV. And to your point, it increased capability by about 40%. I would caution, though, that you do have to find specific applications in specific regions and a lot of other technical things before it can produce those sorts of results that I mentioned. But we've been a very big proponent of grid-enhancing technologies, making sure that they also have a cost-benefit, that favorably score out on that. And when they do, we're all in.
Are other countries already using this type of technology, advanced conductoring?
Or other utilities?
Countries.
I believe so, but I'd have to check with my team to see how extensively they are.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now we have Senator Cassidy.
Mr. Fowke, the chairman just reminded me, do y'all still have that coal-fired plant in Shreveport, Louisiana, or did y'all shut that down?
I believe that has been shut down.
So the chair just reminded me, my ratepayers in Louisiana are still paying for that.
Absolutely.
Because it did not go to its life. So when we speak about higher energy costs, and they've risen significantly during this administration, part of that is the kind of unrealized productivity of sunk assets. And let's be clear, that's regressive. That is regressive. Poor people pay a greater percent of their income for this unrealized potential. But I will note, by the way, in Northwest Louisiana, you guys in CLECO, I think, supply that area, and you all have great reliability. So I just also want to give you a congratulations, a shout out. Our state consumes a lot of energy, and you guys are providing reliable energy, so I appreciate that. Let me ask you this. I recently toured Sempra, building a little bit off of Senator Cortez Masto, Sempra in Southern California, and 100% of their electricity right now is being supplied by renewables. you just got to hand it to them. It's remarkable. Now, I don't think of Southern California as being huge in manufacturing, but there's more than I thought there was. Now, they admitted in another time of the year it would have a mix. But just to say this kind of load balancing, it is possible, correct? I mean, as much as I believe in fossil fuel and the necessity for base load, in a place like Southern California with lots of renewables, et cetera, it's certainly possible, correct?
I will tell you, in all sincerity, they're connected to a big grid that somewhere has that dispatchable 24/7 likely fossil fuel that is supplying them. And you can stream renewables from different places, but at the end of the day, they're still connected to grids that have fossil capability on that.
So I was struck that Micron located downstream from a nuclear power plant. And that was one of the reasons you did there. Somehow I think state subsidies had a role to do with it, but that's okay, we'll leave that. So for that, always got to be on, even if you're like this great utility in Southern California in which at that time they were using 100% renewables, you still got to have that base load.
Absolutely. And, that nuclear power plant is not, I assume, is not behind the meter at Micron. It's on the grid. So it's supplying resources, to the entire grid for the benefit of many customers, not just Micron.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mills, going to permitting reform, I've been interested in the judicial review aspect of permitting reform. Any comments on that?
Well, I think, as you well know, Senator, one of the big challenges for large manufacturers of any kind is that the permits are effectively in an infinite period of potential review, judicial and other forms of review, which is why we see exactly the kind of challenges, especially to the transmission line in Idaho. The same was true in Maine, where I spent my summers, transmission line that just never got built.
So, again, the chairman knows how lawsuit after lawsuit can effectively tie up something and effectively kill the project. So I like to say that the folks on the other side of the dais want power lines, and the folks on this side want pipelines, but we really want both because we know that both are essential. So is it fair to say that the permitting reform that would benefit both power and pipe are the same ones that would benefit pipe and power?
Well, yes, sir, that would be a terrific outcome to accelerate the permitting of both, because the world cannot operate without both.
Gotcha. Sir, I know that Micron has had development in China. I just know that because the Chinese have been somewhat non-cooperative with your economic development there. Is the power source there coal, or what is the typical source that you get there?
I don't know what the power source of our back-end facility, but Micron, we're one of very few semiconductor manufacturing companies that does not have front-end manufacturing.
It does not have what?
Front-end, we don't have a fab in China.
Got it. I want to point out that I just learned this, that I think 60% of Chinese power is generated by coal. They typically don't turn on their scrubbers because that decreases the efficiency. Oftentimes they are built on the Pacific coast, which means the trade winds blow them over to the United States. So the degree that our energy policy increases the cost of energy and therefore encourages someone to move to China, we are actually worsening global greenhouse gas emissions because we're increasing consumption of Chinese coal-fired electricity as opposed to clean-burning U.S. electricity, be it renewables, nuclear, or natural gas. And natural gas has accounted for a decrease in absolute emissions in the United States, less than, I think now, well, certainly 2005, you guys will tell me it's probably even earlier, despite a bigger population, a bigger economy, and more electricity usage. I say all that, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Right on, brother. We have Senator Cantwell now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for highlighting the success of the CHIPS and Science Act. This breakthrough legislation is on track to triple domestic chip manufacturing capacity by 2032. So we should be excited about that. And thanks to the act, that's the largest percentage of semiconductor growth rate in the world. So can't emphasize how important that is. And many people here played a big role in supporting that. But we have the same issues as the chairman mentioned in the Northwest. The Northwest Power Council calculates that the region will need 3,500 megawatts of renewable generation by 2027 and 14,000 1,000 additional megawatts by 2040. So that, I think it's a DOE estimate, puts the Pacific Northwest in a need of 56% more transmission capacity by 2040. So we're very proud of our AI, cloud computing, all of that, but we have to figure out what we're going to do about the power need. You mentioned hydro, so I wanted to ask you about what you think the priorities there for hydro relicensing should be. Do you think we need a tax credit to help spur baseload, keep baseload power in place? And what other things do you think we need to do in the transmission capacity that would be interesting for your next phases of production?
So first, I mean, we're fortunate to operate in Idaho where we have a lot of access to hydro in the Pacific Northwest generation. And then we will be operating in New York where, again, there's additional hydro, access. So it's absolutely a good source of, sustainable energy that we should be continuing to invest in. But I would also say we need to be looking at all sources of sustainable energy, looking at nuclear, small modular reactors, investing in that, investing in improved battery storage technology for wind and solar, which we've discussed here as well, and then geothermal and other sources. Any additional generation that we can get is critical. And then for the grid in the Pacific Northwest, I mentioned the B2H transmission line, getting that put in place and interconnecting, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho more to where there could be seasonal demand fluctuation in differences in generation, being able to share. That's how that transmission line is going to be critical for the Pacific Northwest and enabling interconnectivity.
Well, just to make clear, there are some savings, right? I mean, saving, I think it's like 1/3 or 1/4 the cost to basically save an electron than it is to produce one.
Yeah.
And there is some capacity to build into the grid on smarter technologies that would help us in moving power around where we needed it.
Yeah, and when you look at the availability of power from lower cost sources during different seasonality, and then also you look at the cost of a asset, if you will, of a generation source that sits idle because wind or solar are running at that time, if you could send that power somewhere else to where it could be utilized as a lower cost, that could help savings as well.
What about the tax credit idea? We already have it for wind and solar. Why not for hydro?
One thing I will say in New York, they introduced a zero emissions credit ZEC for their nuclear power plants that they had to work on effectively maintenance activity that they had with their nuclear plants to keep them online and running. So to continue hydro plants funding, that could be a program that you could look at and follow potentially.
Okay. And what about other sources of energy for the future? You mentioned both battery technology. You didn't mention fusion, but we have 3 fusion companies going to work in Everett, Washington. Do you think that there are some other things that Micron is looking at as we think about these data centers and AI integration into the grid?
Yeah, I mean, we produce semiconductors, not energy. We're a consumer of energy, but I will say that we're working to innovate in our factories to lower our consumption and then also our products. It takes power to make our chips, but then it's also about the power our chips use after they get out in the data centers. So every generation of our technology, we're working to reduce the power that they consume. Since 2011, we've done a 10x reduction in our power consumption of our chips. And as I mentioned, our high bandwidth memory is 30% more energy efficient than other competitors' products on the market. So we're working to effectively reduce our energy consumption in those ways.
And I can't emphasize, I don't have enough time, but that's monumental success, right? And when you think about driverless cars or other applications, it's an immense amount of energy and memory that's required. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to follow on the comments from Senator Cantwell about hydro. Just thinking about what we have in place with the hydro production in this country and how it has provided us that great base load. Wonderful. We can do more. We know we need to be doing more. But when we're looking at the number of hydro facilities that are now up for relicensing and recognizing how much it costs to relicense and how long it takes to do it. You know, what's to say that we're not going to have some of these facilities that are just like not worth the time nor the energy? And it goes back to the permitting, but it is something that I think as we think about our energy demands, we have got to have some better projection here. I was in a defense approps hearing not too long ago, and we're talking about PACAV's #1 priority at JBER in Anchorage area there. It's a training facility, and they just very casually say that it's going to increase JBER's power requirements by roughly 50%. And you're thinking about what that means. This is in an area of the state where we're talking right now about importing LNG from Canada because our LNG reserves in Cook Inlet are going down. So we're thinking about what it's going to mean. Are we going to be seeing brownouts? What's happening? Where are we going to get this resource? We've got a governor that's now saying we're going to go back to coal. I mean, there's more than a little bit of panic and anxiety. We had our legislature just shut down just last week, but the whole so much of the focus has been on our energy and the increased consumption, the increased demand here. So question for probably Mr. Fowke and Mr. Mills, this anticipated energy demand, we see the forecasts in filings by the RTOs over the last couple of years, but EIA's latest 2023 annual energy outlook only forecasts demand would grow by about 1% on average from 2022 to 2050. I cannot even begin to think that that is reasonably or remotely sane. It's not the world that we're living in, and we're seeing this every single day. What's the discrepancy here in terms of the forecast, whether it's from EIA or the RTOs? Is the problem in how they're collecting the information, their forecasting issues? We've got to get a better handle on what's coming down the pike here. What do we need to do?
Well, I don't know where EIA is getting their information. That sounds like a forecast that maybe would have been accurate 4 years ago, but not with what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Not with what we're seeing in today's world. I mean, in Central Ohio, we're going to double our capacity in 5 years. We've talked extensively about the amount of demand we're seeing. I think one thing that has to happen within the RTO structures is it's incumbent upon us as a utility to get the updated forecast in a timely manner so they can have full information.
Do you think that they're collecting the right data in order to give you a forecast that is accurate?
Well, the RTOs typically collect their data from their members. So we need to tell them how much load we're seeing. Right. And then, of course, there's a risk adjustment process and how much of that's actually, serious, how much maybe it's duplicate, et cetera, et cetera. But we're working very closely with them to get those forecasts right, and they're recognizing it. And you're starting to see it, Senator, in what's happening, the pricing of capacity, for example, in the PJM market. It's a 3-year capacity window does not encourage capacity that needs to be built for a 30-year time frame. But
Mr.
we're starting
Mills,
to see change.
you want to comment on this?
I think the fundamental problem is the obvious one. It's hard to predict the future. But one thing we do know we can predict is that innovation occurs in episodes. They're interregnums.
Well, and okay, but talk to me, because we just passed the CHIPS Act a couple years ago. We know that's coming, right?
Correct.
So how are we incorporating what we know legislatively, what we know from an appropriations perspective, we should see coming our way?
Well, Senator, I would say this was blowing my own horn, as they say. When the CHIPS Act was passed, I did write and didn't testify before the committee that the effect of that would be to radically increase electricity demand because chip fabs, in fact, in Taiwan, 20% of the entire country's electricity is used to build semiconductor chips. And in Ireland, because it's a data center hub, 20% of the entire country's electricity is to run data centers. This was predictable. It was predicted in the technical literature. I'm one of the players that tries to push it into the public policy domains, but we're told that we'll see efficiency solve, quote, that problem. And what I've pointed out in my testimony and said for years is efficiency doesn't solve the, quote, problem when you have net new demands from new innovation.
Right.
The invention of the car led to the demand for gasoline. The invention of electric car, demand for batteries. The invention of chips, demand for electricity, and so on. So the hard part is that, and I have sympathy for the leaders of electric utilities and RTOs. They're stuck with trying to guess what innovators are doing in this market. They're stuck with guessing that a new Micron might show up one day. I can promise you, as a student of this industry, there are hundreds of new Microns brewing in the country. 5 or 10 of them will succeed. In a very few years, they will demand astonishing amounts of energy, and we'll all act surprised. It's predictable that it will happen. What's hard to predict is exactly when, but it's not a century, it's a few years. And I'll sort of close by saying that the demands, as we have discovered, occur faster than we can get permits to build power plants or relicense hydro dams.
Yep.
And this is the part that has to be resolved, the incommensurate velocity of what we want for growth. We won't get it, and what we don't want to permit. And doesn't matter whether it's transmission lines for wind or the gas turbines and the pipelines for the gas turbines.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ranking Member Barrasso, I have and continue to support your bipartisan efforts to...
We've got contents for you. We're going to have everything at your desk.
I'm ready. I'm looking forward to it.
We're gonna get it to
Support
you.
that permitting reform, and we'll assist any way I can. Obviously, we need to accelerate all the points that you all are making. And it's far beyond whether someone's on one side or the other of the climate change debate. The world's changing so rapidly, and a big part of the ability to respond to the greater need is going to be our ability to move electricity from one place to another. And I'll start with Ms. Honoran. How would you just say specifically, and just a couple of examples of how permitting delays impact your members, their ability to grow?
Right, thank you, yes. So, we are looking into communities as the Micron. We're looking for the reliable. We're looking for states and regions that that are open to infrastructure expansion, that they are not shutting those conversations down. The permitting, of course, when we delay getting that infrastructure in the ground, we cannot expand our operations there because we will not be able to reliably support our operations. We need to have that infrastructure in place. The longer it takes to permit, we either move to a different state or we do not expand. And so we are curtailing our economic prosperity by delaying this permit and getting that infrastructure that we need.
Right. And I think the same was said in terms of reliability.
Absolutely.
The same constraints exist and restrictions. And we've been discussing all about the predictions that NERC has provided that the enhanced interregional transmission would significantly lower costs and enhance reliability. We've got a Big Wires Act to hopefully help coordinate interregional build-out, as I've discussed with several of you over a period of time. And the Speed and Reliability Act would streamline permitting reform on nationally significant lines. Mr. Gatzemeier, Micron's obviously making huge investments in New York and in Boise. How does that reliability and access to low cost influence those decisions?
On the reliability side, we've talked about the impacts that a millisecond dip in power can have, right, in significant product loss for us. So reliability is absolutely paramount. Availability as well, and that's where, the cost of inaction is extraordinarily high here. we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'll just talk about DRAM for a second. 90% of the world's DRAM used to be made here in the U.S. in 1975. Yep. Today, less than 2% of the world's DRAM is made here, and that's at Micron's facility in Manassas, Virginia. With our planned investment, right, in Idaho, New York, we'll get that up, and we'll get to where over 60% of our capacity, 12% of the world's capacity is built here in the U.S. again. But if we're unable to get the power, either the generation or the transmission to the locations where we want to build, it'll be an opportunity missed for the United States.
Right. No, I appreciate that, and I celebrate your innovation and your success. Even though you're Idahoan, we still in the West take that level of innovation. I realize innovation occurs everywhere. I don't want to create enemies. But we do appreciate all that you guys have done and are going to take this Chips Plus Science investment and make the most of it. Mr. Fowke and I have known each other for many years, well back into my gubernatorial days. AEP testified last year before FERC that you're being asked to connect loads across the transmission system footprint equal to roughly 10% of the total U.S. electricity demand today. And earlier this month, DOE released that preliminary list of national interest electric transmission corridors. And many of these, primarily designated areas, fall within AEP's service area. So how would that final designation of these high-priority areas make it easier for you to access new transmission infrastructure and connect new generation? How much of the work has been done?
Yeah, first, good to see you again, and we're very supportive of the Big Wires Act, by the way, and want to continue to work with your staff on that. As far as the national corridors, at AEP, we've had a tremendous amount of success working with our states to get transmission sited, and I think we've had to use eminent domain in less than 3% of the circumstances. So I think what's important, what the national corridors bring, which FERC doesn't have the ability across the full grid, is in those rare cases where we need a federal backstop to step in, when it's a critically important transmission line for reliability, that's where I think FERC today only has that authority in these national corridors. So that to me is the bigger thing than having a national corridor, in my humble opinion, because states should be leading the siting process. I think they're critical in that process.
Totally agree. Great. Thank you all. Appreciate I'm out of time, but I might come back for a second round of questions. Mr. Chair?
Senator Hoeven.
Mr. Chair, I'm just glad I could be here to help balance things out for you.
I'm so happy you're here.
So
looking forward to this.
Well, I knew you would be. Thanks to all of you for being here. I've got to start with Mr. Gatzemeier. I don't know if anybody's mentioned it yet that you were a 4-year member of the University of North Dakota's outstanding swim team, and that you received a BS in electrical engineering, EE. So obviously a jock on campus, and obviously managed to get a electrical engineering degree. Pretty impressive. Then went on to reasonably good schools, although not as good, to get an MBA in Fort Collins and an MS at Berkeley. So I just want to make sure people were aware of your impeccable and outstanding credentials. Probably if you'd have had something in West Virginia in there as well, it would have been trifecta. But seriously...
Now you see why we're happy he's here?
Yeah. He and I were governor together for about 10 years, so we go way back.
Way back.
Way back. But seriously, let me start with Mr. Fowke, and that was serious, but I did want to welcome you. Mr. Fowke, in your testimony, you say that EPA has finalized new power plant sector regulations, and I quote, which could hasten the pace of plant retirements and diminish reliability, end quote. At the same time that FERC is saying we expect we need to increase electricity over the next 5 years, increase it. So don't we need to be focusing on dispatchable resources 24/7 to provide this additional electricity? I mean, it's not going to magically appear out of thin air, right? So aren't we on the wrong track, and don't we need to have EPA work with our baseload industry to make sure we can meet our electricity needs, and we're not like some third world country with blackouts and brownouts, which have already started to happen?
Yeah, I agree with you. I love seeing renewables on the grid, but you cannot substitute 24/7 dispatchable generation. And in fact, if you look at the queue right now, the generation queue, it's, I think, 2.6 terawatts, which is more than double the existing capacity we have on our system. But if you look what's in those queues, Senator, over 95% of it is non-dispatchable generation.
What was the percent?
Over 95% of it is less than 5% of it is dispatchable 24/7 generation. So we absolutely need to hang on to what we have.
I heard you the first time. I just wanted to make sure everybody else did too.
We absolutely need to hang on to what we have. And the EPA rules will, I believe, will hasten the retirement of the dispatchable generation we have on our grid today.
Okay, who wants to disagree with them and why? Let the record show that nobody disagrees. I think that's pretty important. Now, from the user side, Mr. Gatzemeier, I don't know, is dependable electricity important at all in your business, or do you think it's important to anyone else?
It's incredibly important, and I know it's important to all semiconductor manufacturers. Minor interruption, milliseconds, can cause our factories to go down for a week and cause, millions, tens of millions of product loss. So incredibly important. And our factories run 24/7, 365 at peak output operations, so we require, the base load to meet our demand.
So would you argue it's vitally important in terms of our economy being or competitive in a global economy? And would you argue it's important for national security as well to be able to generate energy for ourselves and our allies?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I would guess any other thoughts on how we not only maintain but increase our base load from any of you that would like to respond to that? Mr. Mills, sir.
Senator, it's the fastest way to increase power supplies, because we're talking about demands that are occurring in the next few years, not decade. It's not things we don't know how to build, but things we know how to build. So the fast construction of dispatchable power will come from gas pipes and gas turbines. That'll be the primary source of new supply. This will be true in the United States, almost every state, and it's also true in Europe. It's what's happening around the world, but especially here.
And would you agree that American technology and ingenuity is driving improvements to environmental standards at the same time that we're producing energy on a low-cost basis and on a dependable basis in this country, and that's a better approach than regulations that shut us down and force it to get energy from other countries?
You know the expression that the question answers itself, sir.
Good. Well, I really like that answer. So again, I want to thank all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have, let's see, Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's bothering me about this entire discussion is that we're only talking about half of the equation. We're like in a car on a railroad track with a train coming toward us, and we're talking about the cost of a tow truck. The cost of not addressing climate change dwarfs the cost of addressing climate change. There are reliable studies that indicate as much as 5 times. In Houston today, the power is off. Now, we can talk about this, and you can dismiss these studies and talk about environmentalists and everything else. I'll tell you who's paying attention to this: the insurance companies. They are cold-eyed business people, and there was just a report this morning that Texas has had to create a kind of risk pool because people can't get homeowners insurance because of the volume of these violent storms. So I just want to put the context here. Nobody is saying we should go back to hydro because they love the looks of dams. They're saying we should be talking about renewable power because the alternative to moving in that direction is catastrophic in terms of dollars and cents. So I just wanted to lay that little bit of context. I agree with you all, Mr. Mills and others, about permitting reform. Been working with the chairman for years on this. It's got to include judicial reform. So the whole point is that the process just can't take forever. Last week we had the Secretary of the Interior. I talked to her about it, and I informed her, because of the delays that they have in doing their studies, that Eisenhower retook Europe in 11 months. So I suggested she send an email to her permitting staff with one word: Eisenhower. And so we've got to address that. I understand that. But to act like the transition is just something we're doing because it's a nice thing to do or because some elite group says we should do it is just not accurate. Transmission is obviously a big part of the problem. Mr. Fowke, I like your testimony about GETS. That's not the whole answer, but it's part of the answer. And if you had an indication you increased the throughput by 40% without building new poles, and I think that's the kind of thing. And also, dynamic line management has got to be part of that as well. The other piece is the queue. Nobody's talked about the queue. As you, I think one of you, I think you testified, there's as much power waiting in the queue of the various RTOs around the country that's double the total amount of power being produced in the country right now. And by the way, it's not all non-dispatchable. 500 gigawatts is batteries. Batteries are dispatchable. So there's and that's a technology that's obviously in development. There are other kinds of storage technologies. Good old pump storage has been around for 150 years. All those kinds of alternatives. But Mr. Fowke, how do we get there? I guess I'll go back to my original question. Do you believe we have to address the threat of climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot we can do, but we also have to balance that against the need for reliable and affordable power. And we
Absolutely.
I've spoken many times about this in my former role, and I'll say it as just as somebody that's in the industry. This industry can make tremendous strides to reducing carbon emissions and already has, more than we probably ever thought possible. But that last, you picked a percentage, that last 20% is going to require different technologies than we have today. I'm a big believer.
For example, small modular reactors.
You just took the words out of my mouth, Senator. I'm a big proponent of that. Maybe carbon capture becomes viable. It's not now. Maybe there's something else, but we have to have technology move at the speed of value, and I worry that when we prematurely shut down power plants that are running, that is going to have a very negative impact on reliability and potentially the ability to fund this terrific growth that we're seeing across the country.
Do you agree, though, that the queue is a barrier in itself in terms of what's waiting in line?
Yes, I do, and that's why we think that FERC should be encouraged to fast-track those resources that load-serving entities that have the obligation to serve feel are essential to preserve reliability. We don't have that today, Senator.
I think part of the answer here, we always talk about all of the above. There's so many options, everything from GETS to storage to more efficient conservation. I used to be in the conservation business where we could cut energy usage significantly in a factory or a hospital, and those are kilowatt hours that you can use somewhere else. They're not generation, but they free up generation to be used somewhere else. So plenty of options. Thank you all very much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what to say.
I've gotten wiser.
Say something in West Virginia.
I can't quite speak that language yet, but I'm getting close. Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Senator King noted how important it is for us to deal in this space with climate change, because I agree that the insurance industry certainly has gotten it. When you can't afford homeowners insurance because of the need to cover the results of extreme climate disasters, including, I have to say, wildfires, which is what Maui experienced, then, at least we have one major industry that has said we need to deal with climate change, and thank you for agreeing that that's something we have to do. So I'm interested in the importance of clean energy goals. Mr. Gatzemeier, the analysis firm S&P Global recently released a study on data center power demand that concluded, quote, many of the large technology companies and private equity groups that own and manage data centers have pledged to use green power electricity for their needs, and we expect renewables to ultimately supply a majority of the incremental supply to the facilities, end quote. Can you elaborate on Micron's renewable energy commitments and the role they played in locating new plants Micron is building with the help of the CHIPS and Science Act?
Yeah, so at Micron, we've committed by the end of 2025 to be 100% renewable on our factories in the United States and elsewhere in the world where available. Fortunately, you look at Idaho and New York, the availability of renewables, there was a play. The other thing that we were looking at is entering into co-op solar projects like we did with Idaho Power with the Black Mesa project, which was 40 megawatt project. In addition to that, we'd be looking at additional PPAs or renewable energy credits purchased as well to hit those goals.
So how much of the falling costs of renewable power contribute to Micron setting its energy goals?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How much did the falling costs of renewable power play into Micron setting its energy goals? Moving toward green energy.
Yeah, obviously we look at the cost of energy, and we're in a cost-sensitive business, so we want to continue to drive that and be effective. And fortunately, in the U.S., you can get renewable energy credits. You can look at renewables that are effective today. However, if there's not more generation added onto the grid with the amount of demand that we're talking about, the cost of energy would rise and create problems. So then you'd run into availability issues, reliability issues, and those are the things that we would like to avoid through change here with transmission and additional generation of multiple sources coming online. So solar, wind, battery technology to enable those to be more effective, geothermal, we've talked about nuclear with the small modular reactors, and other investments that could be done to continue down that path to meet all of the goals that we're looking for.
So I think you are an example of a private company that pays attention to these issues. For Mr. Fowke, you described how new data centers could require 3 to 15 times as much power as a more typical industrial plant. Do you think states and utilities should require data centers with such a new demand for power to install energy storage on-site in order to shake back their demand for power from the grid at periods of peak demand?
I think that's an interesting commentary, and it's something we need to look into. I mean, traditionally, and I refer to my colleague, data centers are backed up because of the importance of making sure you have backup power. But I think increasingly, as we look around, I think data centers are more open to doing exactly what you described. I also would want to call to your attention the data center tariff that we filed in Ohio, recognizing that this extraordinary growth needs to be funded fairly by the data centers and not cost shifting to other consumers. We think it's a critically important first step as we move forward with the data center demand we see from the data.
I agree. Mr. Gatzemeier, do you have a comment on this question?
Unfortunately, right now, we have power conditioning coming into our site, but we don't have any cogeneration or large power backup that could, sustain us through a reliability event. So in the case of a reliability issue, we would see power implication that would impact our production in a negative way.
I have run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. So now I get to have a second round by myself. Or at least until the chair gets back. He'll be looming over my shoulder soon enough. Oh, my God. There he is. Looming over my shoulder as predicted. But,
You're on, brother. Take it.
let me ask a final question. Mr. Mills, I'll talk with you because you've been working on this for such a long period of time, and I think you have a perspective. And, part of what America values is in this strange creation of a democracy that most of the time functions pretty well. People have an opportunity to voice their concerns. We spend a lot of time designing process by which neighborhoods and counties and states are heard. Two of the biggest reasons put forward in terms of the slowness of progress, especially in expanding transmission, but also making sure that it's efficient where it needs to be, has been the process, but then also the litigation. How would you rank those, relatively speaking, in terms of where we should put more attention to trying to move more rapidly? And again, I am a big believer that climate change is real and is happening at scale, and the costs of avoiding it, as Senator King said, are enormous. By delaying our response, it's going to cost 5x or 10x what it would cost now. So within that, where should we be focusing our attention?
Well, you know, as a former practitioner of building things, as a physicist and engineer, you're asking me to choose between process and litigation is the lesser of evils. It's a tough challenge. But seriously, I think what you'd find for most industries, the threat of litigation is real, and in the hypertrophied examples, it becomes the critical, the dispositive factor that kills things. But on average, I think what you'd find in business is that it's the process, that is the regulatory process. It's the sand in the gears, as economists would talk about, that faces businesses, small and large, in the United States. So the National Manufacturers Association puts out a semi-annual study at the actual costs of process in the form of regulations, but they monetize it. And of course, in the United States, the last study came out this spring. It's, for a large firm, it's $18,000 a year per employee, and for small firms, $36,000 per year, if I recall correctly, per employee for regulatory compliance process. So that's a huge headwind for businesses to start and expand in the United States. So I would say, if I had to choose the two, I would say the process system, the regulatory systems, federal in particular, but state, are big impediments.
Right, and I appreciate that. And I would argue that the process is, again, uniquely American and critically important.
It is,
yes,
sir.
That we don't want to eliminate it, but certainly I think there are probably ways when we look at something like this where really both sides, the Republicans and Democrats, rural and urban, everybody's got an alignment of self-interest in getting things built more rapidly to address this energy challenge that we face. I think it's maybe a time to go and re-look at some of the processes, make sure people's voices are heard, that there's an inherent sense of fairness in how decisions are made, but we can do it more quickly. With that, I'll yield back to the chair, the man who must be respected, who always is seeing both sides of the fence.
Well, let me just say to all of you, thank you for your expertise that you bring to the committee. I think it's something that we need to continue to raise the alarm, because I can see a real catastrophic situation happening in our country and not being able to meet the demand, no matter what side of the political fence you're on. And it's a shame that politics has divided us up to what team are you on. There's only one team, the American team, and every American expects to have dependable, reliable, and affordable energy, because you know what? They always have. We've built a system around what the needs of the country are and the defense of our country. And we're getting to a situation now because of the political will, if you will, and whoever's in charge wants to push one agenda over the other. And I've always said this, if it's not feasible, it's not reasonable. It really isn't. If you can't do it, we're not there. We haven't matured. Carbon capture, sequestration, Mr. Fowke, I remember I was governor at the time, and Senator, I'll tell you this, Senator Hickenlooper here, you all went into that venture. It was a 900 megawatt plant, Mountaineer plant, correct? I'm understanding, in order to prove that we could commercialize carbon capture sequestration, and you all did that, and we showed that we could take clear-stream carbon off, liquefy it, pressurize it, and put it back in the ground. But it took about if you on scale, it would have taken a third of your power. So when President Obama, and I told him this, I said, President Obama, you've said, go ahead and build a coal-fired plant and I'll break you. And you would. If you made us use carbon capture at that time, we didn't have the maturity and technology. You can't build a plant that costs 900 megawatts of investment and only get 600 megawatts of return. That's the problem. That's how you would break you. So when they said it was a war on coal, there was no alternative. It's either shut it down or get out of the, So that was the problem. I will tell you this, politically, it changed my state of West Virginia to being over 75% Democrat registration. Old line conservative Democrats, but they were still Democrat, that switched now to 80% Republican in one decade because of that. And the only thing I've said about transitions, don't ever take someone's job away from them unless you have something equally as good, if not better, because you will pay the ultimate price on that one. So this transition that's going on, we gave you the maps and everything else. My state will be hit eventually, because if it wasn't for West Virginia 2 years ago with that polar bomb or whatever they called it, remember? Shut everything down. every coal plant we had, and Ben, you can confirm this, you're running about 110%, putting out everything you had to keep PJM from falling apart. It would have gone down. So that's all we're asking this administration to realize, that I'm not defending fossil over renewables or either one. I'm just basically looking at the load that we have and the need. And we've replaced, growing up, the only two dispatchable 24/7 that we had was at that time nukes and coal. Gas has replaced the coal. And we saw gas freeze up in Texas and people died. So we have some work to do there. SMRs are coming on, we're all in. Battery storage, we're all in. Wind has the greatest challenge of all, I believe, of all the renewables they want to use because of permitting. So we need permitting for pipelines to move carbon capture and really get it matured. They need it, we all need it. And that's all we're saying. So when Senator Schumer said, you know, he thought it was not going to go anywhere, I think it must go somewhere, and we have it ready to go, and we will, and we're working with our Republican colleagues here, our Democrat colleagues, and we will go and see if we can move this from this committee forward on the floor. But again, your expertise means an awful lot to us, and I want to thank you for that. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting, but we're going to have members, we'll have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. So with that, thank you. Meeting's adjourned.